Bruce Banner has a relatively small direct family. It happens when your best party trick is turning into a gamma-irradiated green ball of rage. But through his time in Marvel Comics, he has accumulated quite the roster of human, alien, and gamma-mutated companions. Today on Top 10 Nerd, I'm going to attempt to explain the Hulk family tree. Starting off with the One Below All. The One Below All is the dark side and a part of the same being known as the One Above All, who is the supreme ruler of the multiverse and the supreme embodiment of creation and compassion, which would make the One Below All the ultimate personification of destruction and hate. It resides in the lowest point of reality, called the Below Place, from which it rules. Sealed off from the rest of the multiverse through the metaphysical green doors, it manifests in other realities through extreme gamma, which is the mutagenic third form of gamma radiation. This radiation is what creates gamma mutates based off the individual's genetic and psychological makeup. Before we move on though, hey guys, if you're enjoying this channel, dropping a like is all you have to do to help us out. We would really appreciate it. But now, on to the man himself, Bruce Banner. Incredible Hulk #1 from 1962 introduced Dr. Robert Bruce Banner to the Marvel Universe and gave us the very first gamma mutate. During a routine test of the gamma bomb he developed, Bruce spotted a teenager named Rick Jones in the blast radius and he took it upon himself to save Rick's life. He succeeded, but his bomb's explosion opened the first green door, which is a metaphysical barrier into the Below Place, and infused him with gamma radiation, turning him into the Grey Hulk. Now over time, Hulk's skin eventually turned green, thanks to some real-world mix-ups, and he became more childlike. In Incredible Hulk #377, the Green and Grey Hulks merged with Bruce to become a new incarnation, Professor Hulk. But these three different incarnations of Hulk are just a few of the personalities that live in Bruce's fractured mind, and not all of them are good people. On to Bruce's family, starting with Brian Banner and Rebecca Banner. While Bruce is naturally the core figure in this family tree, the roots of the Hulk's rage come from his father, Brian Banner, and without him, there would honestly be no Hulk. If there's a villain in this story, it's Brian. He physically and emotionally mistreated his wife Rebecca Banner and their son. As seen in Incredible Hulk #312 from 1968, Brian became deeply disturbed and obsessed with the idea that his radiation research had turned his son Bruce into a monster. Brian was even responsible for the passing of Rebecca in front of Bruce, which led directly to the development of multiple personalities for Bruce and the Hulk. Years later, during the Chaos War, Brian actually emerged on Earth as a fearsome devil Hulk of his own before he was defeated and returned to the afterlife. More recently though, Brian made a lot of trouble in Immortal Hulk as a servant of the One Below All, and he even gained the ability to possess other gamma-infected human beings. Now Brian Banner himself had two sisters, but the one we want to talk about is Elaine Banner Walters and her husband Morris Walters. Their daughter, the lawyer Jennifer Walters, is Bruce Banner's first cousin and probably the closest thing he has to a sibling. It just so happened that as Bruce was seeking legal aid from Jennifer, she was nearly killed during an assassination attempt. Bruce saved her life by giving her an emergency blood transfusion, but as a result, she became the She-Hulk. Although she started out as a bit of a savage She-Hulk when she first appeared on issue 1 of her comic in 1980, Jen's personality eventually became dominant when she was in her gamma-powered form. In fact, she actually prefers being She-Hulk and put her skills to use as an Avenger and member of the Fantastic Four at one point. In case you've missed any of the ads, she is also the focus of the MCU's She-Hulk attorney at law. Now the first love of Bruce's life was Betty Ross, the daughter of General Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross. Betty and her father both actually became Hulks as well. For Betty, the villain MODOK realized that her exposure to Bruce Banner set her up as an ideal subject to become a new Hulk. In Incredible Hulk #168 from 1968, Betty was transformed, but not into another She-Hulk. Instead, she actually turned into a terrifying harpy who hated the Hulk for the passing of her husband at the time, Glenn Talbot. Betty was soon cured of her harpy persona, but she was ultimately killed by exposure to excess gamma radiation by the Abomination. Fortunately for her though, MODOK and the intelligentsia resurrected Betty and she became the Red She-Hulk. However, in the Immortal Hulk series, Betty once again has been transformed into the Red Harpy. I hope that wasn't too confusing. Now, as for her father, no one hated Bruce Banner more than Betty's father, General Thunderbolt Thaddeus Ross, a military general who became obsessed with stopping the Hulk at any cost. That's why it took everyone by surprise when Ross actually turned out to be the Red Hulk, who is a fiery and power-draining gamma mutate. Ross made the mistake of partnering with the intelligentsia, who tricked him and turned him into the Red Hulk, using energy siphoned off of the original Hulk. Ross embraced his newfound Hulk powers, proving to be an incredibly powerful and capable hero. Bruce and Ross eventually did make an alliance to take down the intelligentsia, and Red Hulk was actually invited to join the Avengers. Ross was eventually depowered, but as of Captain America number 26 from 2018, he is once again the Red Hulk. Now, when the Hulk was banished from Earth by the Illuminati during Planet Hulk, he crash-landed on the planet Sakaar, which is where the Hulk met his second wife, Kaira. Although Kaira appeared to die in the destruction of Sakaar, she actually gave birth to Bruce/Hulk's first children, Scar and Hero Kala. Scar became an incredibly powerful warrior with a vendetta against his father, but thankfully Scar and Bruce reconciled before becoming a formidable father and son team. Unfortunately for Hero Kala, his taste for power and vengeance corrupted him, and he also nearly destroyed the Earth in Incredible Hulk's number 617, before his father and brother sealed Hero Kala within the center of an alien planet. Hulk's other daughter is a bit trickier to explain. The short version is that Lyra is a daughter of the Hulk and Thundra from the alternate future timeline of Earth 715, where only 5% of the female population were fertile. Hulk and Thundra were never actually a couple. Instead, Thundra collected the Hulk's DNA from his saliva during a fight and immediately traveled back to her alternate future, where she used that DNA to create Lyra, who is basically a She-Hulk, and actually gets weaker the angrier she gets instead of stronger, meaning she has to reach a meditative state to reach peak power. Now, Lyra eventually came to live in the present alongside the Hulk, Jennifer Walters, and her extended Hulk family. Finally, in terms of Hulk romances, we have Jarella, the princess of the subatomic kingdom of Kai. She was never married to the Hulk or Bruce, but she loved both halves of him very much, and he also loved her. Their bond was so important that Jarella definitely is included on this list, despite the fact that she tragically passed away before they could wed. From Hulk's actual family to those who are essentially his family by association, his friends and allies, starting with none other than Rick Jones. If not for Bruce's timely rescue, Rick Jones could have been the first Hulk, but instead, he was spared from that fate and became one of Bruce Banner's closest and most trusted friends. In Incredible Hulk number 325 in 1962, Rick did actually get a little taste of Hulk power when he fell into a chemical pool that was being used to merge Bruce and the Hulk back into a single being once again. Rick emerged as a Hulk, but he was cured a few chapters later in issue number 332. It wouldn't last long though, as thanks to the meddling of the intelligentsia yet again, Rick was mutated into a new version of Abomination in Hulk number 2 in 2008. As this new Abomination, Rick actually retained most of his personality, and so he renamed himself A-Bomb so he could be a bit more heroic, which was a good choice, Rick. Good job. Rick was also horrendously mutated in Immortal Hulk before his humanity was finally restored in the limited series Gamma Flight from 2021. Doc Sasquatch, or Doc Samson. Doc Samson is one of the few members of the Hulk/Gamma family who willingly transformed himself. It happened in Incredible Hulk number 141 in 1962 when Bruce Banner was temporarily cured of his Hulk persona by removing the excess radiation from his body. Samson couldn't resist taking that power for himself, but he wasn't turned into a full Hulk. Instead, he was given superhuman strength and a striking head of green hair, likely due to his psychological makeup with him wanting to be a hero. In Immortal Hulk, Doc Samson got trapped in the below place and instead resurrected into the body of Walter Lankowski, also known as Sasquatch. He then became a green-haired version of the Sasquatch. Despite his great strength, Samson's greatest contribution to the Marvel Universe has been in actually as a therapist for heroes and villains in need. During the event World War Hulk, Amadeus Cho was one of the few heroes who stood by the Hulk in his battle against the Illuminati. This was fueled by Amadeus's unshakable assertion that the Hulk is actually a hero and not a monster. Now years later, in Totally Awesome Hulk #1 from 2015, Amadeus got his wish to become a Hulk as well. As revealed in issue #4, Amadeus absorbed the excess gamma radiation from Bruce, saving his life while transforming Amadeus in the process. It was a burden that he was more than happy to accept. However, not even Amadeus's intellect and personality could keep the negative aspects of being a Hulk at bay forever. After briefly losing control of his other self, Amadeus willingly depowered himself, but he still retains a significant amount of gamma powers as an agent of Atlas. The Juggernaut, Agamemnon, Glenn Talbot, the Red King, MODOK, Ravage, Wendigo, the UFOs, with a special shout out to Absorbing Man, are all villains that come into conflict with the Hulk. We have already talked about his longest lasting foe, Thunderbolt Ross, or the Red Hulk, but what about his other big bads? Starting with probably the most iconic of the Incredible Hulk's rogues gallery is the one and only Abomination. A dark mirror image of the Hulk, former soldier Emil Blonsky becomes the monstrous Abomination in an attempt to stop the Hulk, being mutated by a gamma machine that was created by Bruce Banner. On countless occasions, Abomination has taken on the Hulk in a one-on-one match. While he's lost time and time again, there have been times where he did give the Hulk a run for his money and even took down the people Hulk loves and cares for. Abomination makes for a fantastic villain, and there's a reason Marvel keeps bringing him back. For someone like the Hulk, a villain with higher intelligence is far greater than someone with equal strength. Samuel Stearns was once a normal man who was exposed to a high level of gamma radiation just like mostly everyone else. The radiation gave him increased intelligence, a really big head, literally, and turned him into the leader. A foe who has time and time again outsmarted and worked around the likes of the Hulk. The leader's almost always 5 steps ahead of Bruce Banner and manages to bring the Hulk down despite his immense strength. And lastly, it honestly makes sense that the most terrifying foe for the Incredible Hulk is actually himself. While the Abomination can be seen as a dark reflection of the Hulk, the Maestro is literally a future evil version of himself. Coming from one of the comic's best Hulk story arcs, Future Imperfect, the Maestro is the last hero who survived an apocalypse and set himself to become the ruler of dystopia. Stronger than his past self and with all the intelligence of Bruce Banner, the Maestro has proved himself to be the strongest and most brutal Hulk villain out there.
Time to try and explain the family tree of what is in essence a cosmic ball of black goo that reproduces asexually. That should be easy, right? Welcome back, Nerd Squad. We're going to be doing something a little different today, so if you like it, be sure to shout it out down in the comments and spread the word. Especially, I ask you to do that because I had a lot of fun writing this for you today, so yeah. Today we won't be counting, so sorry about that count, but we will be explaining or trying to explain the bizarre cosmic gooiness that is the Venom family tree. Follow me as we dive deep into the Venom verse. Where should we start? Okay, how about at the beginning, where all of this madness started with Venom. When this symbiote first appeared in the comics, it was believed and actually advertised as being simply a new look for Spider-Man's Peter Parker. However, fans didn't really like his new threads so much, and so the new costume was transformed into a new character, becoming Venom, a symbiotic alien made of black goo that came from outer space. Namely, as we'd learn later, from a planet named Clintar. We would learn that Venom had actually been cast out from the Hive Mind, the collective of Clintar symbiote minds, which connected them all. But where did Venom come from? Other than Clintar, I mean, who made Venom? Well, that is actually believed to have been Null, the one who also made the first symbiote, known sometimes as the All Black, Venom's oldest sibling. Daddy Null isn't just the father of Venom, you see. He is the father of pretty much all symbiotes that exist on Clintar, having created the planet and the race known as the God of Symbiotes himself, and as an eldritch god of darkness. Yeah, Null really old. But Null wouldn't just be a father to these many symbiotes. Honestly, Venom has more siblings than I have time to mention them all individually in this video, and many of them still remain unnamed in the comics as well. But trust me, they are all out there and there are a lot of them. Null can also be considered at this point a grandfather and even a great-grandfather when it comes to the Venom family tree, because after Venom came to Earth, it also ended up getting somewhat busy. with itself, making other little baby symbiotes. That's what happens when you reproduce asexually. You don't get busy with other people, you just make babies. Venom and other symbiotes of Clintar besides are asexual when it comes to their reproduction, meaning that they don't need a mate to, well, mate. Although it should be noted that it wasn't until after Venom connected with his host, his, you could say, soulmate, Eddie Brock, the Venom would produce offspring. Do with that information what you will. Scientifically, however, symbiotes typically only ever give birth to one offspring, but Venom is a special case. It had symbiotic babies extracted from it at one point against its will, which challenged the normal reproductive symbiote status quo. So the Venom symbiote kind of breaks the mold when it comes to the limits of symbiote reproduction, at least as we know it to exist in the rest of the universe. Regardless of whether or not being with Eddie had any impact on the time when Venom reproduced, Eddie is still a very important figure in Venom's life and family tree, often being regarded as one of the symbiote's closest allies and basically Venom's life partner. Initially, when Venom came to Earth, it merged with Spider-Man, but was rejected by the hero. Upset and hurt by the rejection, Venom chose to bond with Eddie Brock, who also had his own reasons for hating Spider-Man. The two bonded over their hatred of the hero, and it often was what kept them together, at least initially. Venom has other hosts, but if we have time, we'll try to touch on that later. For now, let's talk about all of Venom's kids. The first and eldest symbiote among Venom's offspring would be Carnage. Carnage was actually born during a prison breakout. Eddie, you see, was locked away and was cellmates with notorious serial killer Cletus Cassidy. Cletus and Eddie did not get along, and in some versions of the story, Venom arrived right in time to save Eddie, as Cletus had planned to murder him in his cell. That's how much the two did not get along. Although to be fair to Eddie, Cletus really likes murdering people. So regardless of if they got along, a murder attempt would have probably been inevitable. Carnage was born as Venom broke Eddie out and the two escaped, which also in turn freed Cletus, who had now merged with Carnage. The symbiote bonded to Cletus's blood, which some have explained as happening due to it being newborn, and of course due to Cletus having a cut on his hand, where Carnage could enter through. As Carnage, the two bonded would prove to be even stronger than Venom, and would require Venom and Spider-Man to team up in order to take on Carnage during the Maximum Carnage crossover event, which is pretty crazy because, you know, they're enemies. Venom was supposed to be a bad guy. Although symbiotes usually only produce a single offspring, Venom was forced into producing more after they were kidnapped by the Life Foundation, which, you know, sounds like it would be a lovely scientific organization based on the name of it, but really, it isn't. The Life Foundation is usually more concerned with the safety of the wealthy elite than advancements or defenses to protect all life, as their name would or should imply. They managed to capture Venom and forcibly harvest 5 new children from it, 5 seeds if you will, who would become known as Phage, Lasher, Riot, Agony, and Scream, all of them symbiotes. The first 4 in particular would become quite close during the time with the Life Foundation, possibly because Venom was under duress while spawning these new offspring. These 5 children were not nearly as strong as Carnage was. As a result, Phage, Lasher, Riot, and Agony became used to merging together to create the hybrid symbiote. This was of course when they weren't busy with their own individual hosts. Lasher would actually be bonded to a dog at one point, which would then have private military personnel working in tandem with the symbiote bonded doggo. So that person that had a symbiote was like, my symbiote's a dog. And the other symbiotes were each bonded to private military personnel hired by the Life Foundation initially. Scream is more often associated with doing their own thing. The Scream symbiote was bonded initially with the schizophrenic Donna Diego, a Life Foundation security guard codenamed Strike Agent 4. Venom's final child, thus far anyways, I guess we'll see if Venom has any more children, is Sleeper. Sleeper is also a unique symbiote, and although it's not as powerful as Carnage, is seemingly more powerful than the Life Foundation symbiotes. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, I'd say. Sleeper was born with the assistance of Eddie Brock, who did his best to help the Venom symbiote through labor after discovering that the symbiote was expecting. This is probably the closest the two have ever gotten in terms of like a semi-shared pregnancy with each other. Initially, Venom hid the fact that they were were expecting from Eddie, only hinting at the possibility. But eventually, all was revealed, and Venom confessed that they had been scared to actually share that information with their host. Eddie, however, stood by Venom and attempted to stay bonded to the symbiote while it gave birth to help give it strength. Sleeper was initially believed to have died while being born, but was later revealed to be alive and well, an overall healthy, small little bundle of goo. Sleeper was also delivered with the help of Alchemax and would end up there to be studied, as was permitted by Eddie Brock and the Venom symbiote, so long as the research being conducted on their baby was non-invasive. Venom would come to visit Sleeper regularly and was wary of the symbiote bonding with a host too early, as they were basically worried about the potential for Sleeper to be corrupted by a host, wanting to avoid the potential evil that Carnage had become. Which I get it, if you had your first child and they were like literally the worst of the worst, I feel like every time you had kids thereafter you'd be like, oh, hopefully this one isn't like an evil murderer. Goodness. Someone who would also become good friends with Sleeper was Dylan Brock, who is, yes, the son of Eddie Brock and his ex Anne Wang, the secret son of the pair. Apparently, when Dylan was conceived, Eddie and Anne both had been bonded to the Venom symbiote at the same time, and because of that, it was believed that Venom was also in part a genetic donor to Dylan's creation and birth. Anne herself was also surprised to find herself pregnant with Dylan after the experience of becoming she-Venom, while Eddie was also still bonded to the symbiote. So this wasn't necessarily a normal pregnancy for Anne either. Dylan is actually the current host of Venom, who has been tasked with looking after Dylan and keeping an eye on him during his father's absences. It wasn't until recently that Eddie and Venom learned of the existence of Dylan and how he was Eddie's, Anne's, and in a way, Venom's son. But the two together have wholly embraced the concept of fatherhood as they accepted Dylan into their family tree, working together to keep him safe, even when he was being hunted down during the Absolute Carnage event by a resurrected Carnage who sought to revive Null by absorbing the codices within the spines of all the former symbiote hosts on Earth, which was a pretty crazy event. But fortunately, Dylan made it through. Yay! But how many of Venom's kids have kids? Is Venom a granddad? In the case of Carnage, yes, they are. Carnage has multiple children, so it seems father like son in terms of, breaking the mold on symbiote reproduction here. Carnage's first offspring is Toxin, who is widely regarded to be one of the most powerful symbiotes of all time, second only maybe to someone like Null or perhaps maybe Anti-Venom. I personally think Anti-Venom is also up there. Initially, both Carnage and Venom teamed up to hunt down Toxin, as both were concerned by the amount of power Toxin would wield. Fortunately, Black Cat and Spider-Man teamed up and protected Toxin, allowing the newborn symbiote to escape its relatives. Aside from Toxin, Carnage also gave birth to Scorn as a result of being experimented on in the process of using the symbiote and technology to create hybrid prosthetics. As such, Scorn is also part tech, kinda like a cyborg symbiote if you will. Then there are the symbiotes born from Carnage's own experiments with the Darkhold, one of which is Ray's, the other of which was bonded to Jubilila Van Scotter, and Unnamed, both of which are now believed to be deceased. The symbiotes, of course, not necessarily their hosts. They were seemingly used up in a fight against Chthon and Carnage, and so they're no longer around. I think Scorn at this point also might be gone. And we thought Toxin was gone, but I'm pretty sure Toxin's alive? Yeah, a lot of death. Doesn't go well if you're a Carnage offspring. Aside from children, grandchildren, parent, and main host, Venom has also had a slew of other influential hosts as well as genetic recipients and clones over the years. Here's a brief list of some of the most influential members of that extended part of their family. But, not all of them because I'm running out of time here. Cloned from a piece of Venom's tongue, we have Mania, or Maniac. Mutated clone, Anti-Venom. Dubbed the original host, Kree Telkar. Other than Eddie Brock, possibly one of the best heroic hosts we've seen for Venom, Flash Thompson, aka Agent Venom. Currently Agent Anti-Venom, because bonded with Anti-Venom. Widely proclaimed the worst and most cruel host, Lee Price. Famed host of Carnage, who also is bonded with Venom, Cletus Cassidy, and Superior Spider-Man / Venom, aka Freaky Friday Otto Octavius in Peter Parker's body with the Venom symbiote. And that's just some. Spider-Man is one of the most popular superheroes on the planet. You know him, you know his abilities, but do you know where he came from and who surrounds him on his family web? Welcome in, Nerd Squad. It's me, Amanda. Join me today as we explore the family tree of Spider-Man, discussing his children, his secret sister, and more. Which family tree should we do next? Where are Spider-Man's parents? While Spider-Man was raised by his aunt and uncle from a young age, his actual parents were Richard and Mary Parker. Richard grew up in New York City and Queens and was actually the much younger brother of Ben Parker, who would of course become a guiding light for Peter as he started out as a young hero, with Ben's loss instilling in Peter the famous motto, "Great power comes great responsibility." Richard was a secret agent working for the CIA, who in fact was brought into the fold by none other than the original Nick Fury. Mary herself was also a secret agent working for the CIA, and both her and Richard often went on missions together, working side by side. They were killed after being found out when they were working as double agents, attempting to infiltrate an Algerian spy ring. The finisher was the one who ultimately did the deed, but was ordered to do so by Red Skull after the Red Skull learned of their true allegiances. Spider-Man's secret sister? While Uncle Ben and Aunt May have each played major roles in Peter's life, before we move on to them, I want to talk about his potential secret sister, Teresa Parker. Oh yeah, Spider-Man has a secret sister. Or does he? Teresa Parker, as we'd come to know her through the comics, was at time believed to be the daughter of Richard and Mary Parker, who they actually had in secret. Because of her birth being kept a secret, she was therefore not raised alongside her brother Peter under the care of Uncle Ben and Aunt May, but instead, she was adopted. Years later, like her father, she too would be recruited into the CIA by Nick Fury. To put it mildly, her origin is confusing. Even for Teresa, she struggled to find the real truth of her parentage. While there are clues that have led her to believe she herself is a Parker, it's possible that she was simply manipulated into thinking this by external villainous forces. It's also possible that her parents were simply shapeshifters impersonating Richard and Mary, and there's actually stuff in Teresa's life that has led us to believe that, which has also been, suggested and implied in the comics, so that could be a possibility. However, regardless of her true origin, after her adventures with Spider-Man, Teresa decided to reject all other alternative origins that were offered and instead see herself as a Parker, regardless of whether or not she was actually the birth daughter of Richard and Mary. So even if she isn't actually blood related to Peter, she isn't actually the true sister of him, to Teresa, she'll always see herself as his sister. Uncle Ben and Aunt May's origins. Benjamin Parker was the much younger brother of Richard Parker. When he was younger, he fell for one of the prettiest women around, May Riley. However, at the time, having spent most of her life struggling financially, she was attracted to another man who she believed could give her a life of comfort and adventure during a time when economically many were actually struggling. However, Ben came to help May realize the truth about her suitor at the time, Johnny Jerome, who was actually a criminal. After realizing the truth about Johnny and grieving the loss of her first love, May actually began to fall for Ben, and really, the rest is kinda history. Although the couple's life together wouldn't always be easy, and they would still have their own arguments, even almost breaking up multiple times, ultimately their life together was still one filled mostly with happiness and with a lot of love. They were married and did attempt to start having a family, but health complications prevented them from doing so. While his brother Richard and his sister-in-law Mary were killed in the line of duty working for the CIA as undercover agents, Ben and May had been looking after Peter, and actually ended up adopting him after they learned what had happened to the young couple. 3 become 2. While Aunt May would eventually become Peter's rock in his life, initially she was reluctant in her role as his parental figure and basically his adoptive mother. Ben, however, was quick to warm up to Peter and easily transitioned into the role of a father figure for the young boy. And while May thought back to her own childhood and how her parents had blamed her birth for the trouble between them, she would also eventually warm up to Peter. Instead of Peter driving a wedge between Ben and May, adopting him and taking him in actually had the opposite effect for them, strengthening their bond and their love for one another. Tragically, Ben would be ripped from both May and Peter shortly after the young Parker first manifested his spider-like powers. It was actually Ben's loss that gave Peter more motivation to act as a superhero, teaching him that with great power comes great responsibility. With the loss of Ben, May would once again be forced to struggle financially, prompting Peter to get a job at the Daily Bugle as a photographer to help support his aunt. However, this also caused May to worry about her young nephew, as she initially did not know that he was also secretly the superhero Spider-Man, although of course she would come to know that. Who are Peter's grandparents? Did you know that Peter is actually the second of his name? Technically, we should call him Peter Parker II. His grandfather on his dad's side was also a Peter. He and his wife Anne had their names recorded recorded in a copy of the Daily Bugle in 1939, where the birth of their firstborn son, Ben, was announced. Peter and Ann Parker would of course become parents to not just Peter's famous Uncle Ben, but also his father, Richard Parker, as the two are brothers. We don't know much about Mary's parents either, Peter's maternal grandparents. However, we do know that Mary was mainly raised by her father, William Fitzpatrick, whose wife tragically died quite young. Her name is, as of yet, still unknown to us. The former wife of Spider-Man. Did you know that Peter Parker was actually married? There's a whole bunch of stuff there. It's true. As time progressed in the comics, Peter would grow up, going through high school and college, and eventually settling down with his love, Mary Jane Watson. Prior to this, one of Peter's greatest loves was actually Gwen Stacy, and even after marrying Mary Jane, Peter still often thought of Gwen, who died young at the hands of his foe, Green Goblin. Although as Spider-Man, Peter had actually tried to save Gwen, he ultimately failed to do so, and some actually even consider her death his fault, as the tension of his web is believed to have actually caused Gwen's neck to snap. Although Green Goblin has claimed before that the sheer shock of the fall for Gwen would have basically killed her, and that she was already dead by the time his web would have reached her. Why am I mentioning all this in a part of the video where I'm meant to be talking about Peter's wife? Well, because there are alternate worlds and realities where Peter does actually end up with Gwen. In the House of M reality, the two of them settled down together and even had a son, and I think part of Peter always wonders what his life would have been like had Gwen lived. However, Mary Jane was also friends with Gwen and also felt her loss. I also feel like Gwen's death actually brought her and Peter closer together. Peter and MJ's relationship was never really easy, with MJ at first not being very interested in the idea of a committed relationship, and wanting more to focus on her career as a performer and a model, as well as simply just having fun. However, after a few attempted proposals, MJ eventually did say yes, and the two were married for quite some time, even almost successfully starting a family together. And just as there are alternate realities where Gwen and Peter are together, there are many alternate realities where MJ and Peter are as well, and where they also have kids together, including the alternate worlds of MC2 and Renew Your Vows. However, in the main continuity, their marriage would not last after Mary Jane and Peter ultimately decided to sacrifice their relationship to Mephisto in order to save Aunt May's life, after she was shot in a hit that had been intended for Peter during Back in Black. The children of Spider-Man. While in the multiverse, Spider-Man actually has many children. In the main continuity, he hasn't really ended up with any, at least not currently and not as far as we know right now. He was almost a dad when he and his wife Mary Jane were pregnant with a daughter. Unfortunately, the young, soon-to-be parents were later made to believe, following delivery, that their daughter had actually been lost to them. In reality, we learned that the child had lived, but had actually been swept away as part of Norman Osborn, Green Goblin's own sinister plans. Despite the hope, however, that one day this child might return to her parents, honestly, I'm still a little hopeful of that, it would later be established that their daughter May had been disposed of later on at the order of Norman Osborn. In the MC2 reality, however, Peter and MJ's daughter does exist and was raised by both of her parents. She would grow up and develop her own spider-like abilities and powers, becoming known at first as the hero Spider-Girl, before adopting the mantle of Spider-Woman. This version of the character is also named May Parker, after Peter's beloved Aunt May, and is often referred to by her nickname of Mayday. Norman Osborn at one point also manipulated twins, Gabriel and Sarah Stacy, to believe that they were in fact the children of Spider-Man and Gwen, while also making them believe that Spider-Man was actually responsible for their mother's death. These children, however, were actually at first revealed to be the children not of Peter and Gwen, but of Norman and Gwen. I know. Fortunately, we'd later learn that this was also not true, and that they were actually clones created by Harry Osborn to torment his father Norman, having Norman's mind manipulated so that he would believe he had slept with Gwen, when in reality, he actually hadn't. Thank goodness. Thank you for fixing that, because it broke my brain. In the main continuity, there is also Master Matrix, who sees Deadpool and Spider-Man actually as his dads, funnily enough. Master Matrix is a life model decoy initially reassembled by Peter's parents, Richard and Mary Parker. After being activated, this LMD would come to see Deadpool and Spider-Man as his parents, and would also work alongside them as an ally. More recently, Matrix appeared in the Amazing Mary Jane series, where he befriended MJ after joining a film crew and also helped to defeat the Savage Six.
The Inhuman royal family, also known as the House of Agon, is the ruling group of the Inhumans of Atalan. They are a powerful, close-knit, and awesome group of superpowered individuals. I'm Adam with Top 10 Nerd, and today I'm going to attempt to explain the Inhuman royal family. But hey, since I'm only talking about the individuals, what are some topics surrounding Inhumans that you'd like to see explained? Terrigenesis? Attilan? New humans? Let us know in the comments down below. The Inhumans are an offshoot of humanity that was genetically altered by the Kree centuries and centuries ago. They mostly kept to themselves, hiding from humanity in their city of Attilan. The Inhumans developed a highly technological society that only got more advanced with the discovery of the Terrigen mists that would give the Inhumans fantastic abilities. Inhumans age much slower than normal humans do, usually living for around 150 years, thanks to selective breeding overseen by the Genetic Council, and as such, each generation of Inhumans is long and honestly relatively unknown. Each Inhuman spouse is predetermined and they are limited to 2 children, which makes our job easier, at least when they actually follow the rules. But when talking of the Inhuman royal family, also known as the House of Agon, it can be traced back at least 2 generations. Starting with the first generation, the first 4 families whose roots grew into the different key members of the royal family we know today. They were Simak and Tanith, who together had Agon, who the house is named for, and his brother Korath. Magnar and Zeta were another couple who together gave birth to Mander and Rinda. There was also Kobar and La. These two produced Azur and Amber, which kind of sounds like a Pokemon generation. And finally, there was an unidentified 4th pair who spawned 2 children, one of which was identified as Quellen, and the other is still unknown. Who this family member is just hasn't really been talked about. Honestly, a lot of the Inhuman royal family history isn't known, being only given to us in brief little flashbacks, with information that is really only key to the story it's being told in. But from here, the royal family splits even more into the 2nd generation and their children. Here we see the offspring from each of these original 4 families come together in different combinations. But first, if you're enjoying this video, make sure to drop a like. That's all you gotta do to let us know that we're doing a good job. Now, starting with the royal family's namesake, Agon, son of Simak and Tanith, was betrothed to Rinda, the daughter of Magnar and Zeta. Agon and Rinda were seemingly the first who began producing offspring around 100 years ago. Now, their first child was named Blackagar Baltagon, or simply Black Balt. Agon decided that Black Balt would be exposed to the Terrigen mists while he was still in the womb. Shortly after Black Balt was born, they discovered he had awesome powers. These powers were complete control over the electrons around him, and the power he is most well known for, an incredibly powerful hypersonic voice that at first he could not control. Both Agon as well as the Inhumans Genetics Council, who play a large role in governing the Inhumans, came to agreement that Blackagar needed to be confined until he had control over his powers, when he was around 19 years old. Blackagar's voice can cause mass destruction with even a whisper, and if he screams or yells, he could potentially wipe out an entire planet. Luckily, he has learned to communicate without speaking and uses a tuning fork that helps him control his powers. It was actually thanks to the power of Black Balt that Agon became ruler when the last ruler, the Unspoken, tried to hide the Slave Engine, which is a powerful Inhuman weapon. But Black Balt is not the only offspring of Agon and Rinda. There was a 2nd child, Maximus, sometimes known as Maximus the Mad, who appeared to develop mental mind control powers after being exposed to the Terrigen mist. At its peak, Maximus can override the minds of countless others, or even enhance his own mind. He can blank people's minds or control their actions for as long as he concentrates. As with a lot of families in comic books, there is almost always a black sheep. For Asgard, that is Loki. For the Eternals, it's usually Druig, and for the Inhumans, Maximus takes that title, as he is particularly dangerous, being both a mind manipulator and a genius, naturally gifted with the ability to invent all manner of powerful machines, but with the younger brother complex that has him believe he is the one who should rule the Inhumans. Now, outside of the direct Agon line, there were more who make up this royal family. Korath, the son of Simak and Tanith, married another Inhuman woman named Melina, who together had a son named Gorgon, who was also exposed to the mists as an infant. Through the Terrigen mist, Gorgon developed cloven hooves and incredibly powerful bull-like legs that could cause huge shockwaves capable of creating earthquakes when he stomps. He is one beast of an Inhuman and usually serves as a bodyguard for his cousin and eventual king, Black Bolt. but he also served as a mentor for younger generations. Next up we have Mander, the brother of Agon's spouse Rinda, and by extension, the brother-in-law to Agon himself. Mander formed a union with Azur, the daughter of Kobar and La. Together, Mander and Azur had their first son Triton, and exposed him to the mists when he was an infant as well, but for Triton, the mists had a pretty extreme effect, turning the boy into a fish-like humanoid and water breather who needed to remain in an isolated aquatic alcove off the coast of Adelan in order for him to survive. Later though, adaptive devices were developed to allow Triton to join the other Inhumans on land. Because of Triton's extreme transformation, when Mander and Azur had their second son, Karnak, they did not expose him to the Terrigen Mists and urged him to remain unaltered, as they didn't want to potentially be separated from both of their children. Instead, Karnak became my absolute favorite Inhuman when he was sent to the Tower of Wisdom, where he was trained in various mental disciplines and Inhuman martial arts, becoming a master and developing an ability that allowed him to see the flaws in any person, object, plan, or even concepts like, at one point, death itself. He usually plays the role of an advisor in the royal family as well as a bodyguard and strategist. Lastly, Amber, the other daughter of Kobar and La and sister to Azur, married Quellan, who, if you remember, is the Inhuman whose parentage has not been established at this point yet. Together, Quellan and Amber had two children. The first would be Medusalith, or just Medusa, who would be betrothed to the future Inhuman king, Black Bolt. Medusa gained the ability to control the growth rate and movement of every strand of hair on her head, also known as trichokinesis. She maintains this control even if her hair is cut off, but that is difficult to do as Medusa's hair is stronger than steel. Amber and Quellan, a few months after Medusalith's birth, had a second daughter, Crystal, probably my second favorite Inhuman. Crystal's exposure to the Terrigen Mists gave her elemental powers to control fire, water, earth, and air, making her actually really powerful. Crystal is also probably the most public of the Inhumans, interacting with the heroes of Earth quite a bit more, having a relationship with Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, in the early days, and then being married to Pietro Maximoff, Quicksilver, and having a child with him. At some point, the House of Agon also exposed the bulldog known as Lockjaw to the Terrigen Mists, making him one, humongous, but also two, developing the power to teleport. Lockjaw was the loyal pet to Crystal, but also obeyed most of the royal family as well, using his teleportation to be a key member of the family and a very, very good boy. With these key Inhumans being who the story centered around for a long while in Marvel Comics, some have had children of their own. Keeping the trend of starting with the direct family of Agon, Black Bolt and Medusa had a son together named Ahura Boltagon. Now, Ahura was born without consent of the Genetic Council, and he had similar powers to his father, but after exposure to the mists and his banishment to Earth, his abilities were replaced with much more sinister ones, and he had quite the spell of madness, just like his uncle, Maximus. This led to him becoming a large threat to the Inhumans, and they worked very hard to try and treat him. After a whole hubbubaloo with Kang the Conqueror and Terrigenesis, Ahura has the ability to split his soul to create psychic phantoms that can possess others. He can also create psychic constructs and can astral project. Now, Ahura has a cousin in the form of Luna, the daughter of both Crystal and Quicksilver. She is the first ever Inhuman and mutant offspring, sometimes called an Inmutant. Very clever. The thing is, the cross of these two powerful species actually canceled each other out, leaving Luna as kind of a normal human being. At least at the start. When Luna was 6 years old, Quicksilver was depowered by the decimation of mutant kind. In an attempt to regain his powers, he exposed himself to the Terrigen Mists and brought Luna back to Earth with him, where he exposed her to some collected mist as well, believing this to be a birthright she had thus far been denied. The process was successful and granted Luna the ability to sense, remove, and alter the emotions of others at will. Next up would be the children of the tank of the Inhuman royal family, Gorgon. Gorgon loved and married another Inhuman by the name of Mira, who sadly passed away. Now, Gorgon had two children, presumably with Mira, who also gained animalistic qualities after Terrigenesis. Alecto, their daughter, gained pretty cool leathery wings that allowed her to fly. obviously. Her younger half-brother, Petrus, was pressured by his father into undergoing the process of the Terrigen Mist at a young age, during Thanos' invasion of Earth. After coming out of the mists, Petrus transformed into a more Minotaur-like form with a large bull or bison-like head, with a relatively normal human, or I guess Inhuman body. Last but not least would be the son of Karnak. When all of the Inhumans' Terrigen Mists was destroyed, Karnak handed his son over to Mr. Sinister in order to awaken his latent powers without the need of Terrigenesis. Interestingly, Lear gained the ability to amplify the powers of other Inhumans, but apparently this power could only be used one time, which has already happened, so we don't know if he has more powers waiting to rear their head. The only other large addition to the royal family would be when it was revealed that the Kree, who had experimented on humans to create the Inhumans, also carried out the same experiment on 4 other species on 4 different planets. This had been kept for thousands of years until the discovery of the Universal Inhumans, which is the group for all 5 of these Inhuman populations. These races were also implanted with a genetic memory that would give them the urge to unite together as one people. The genetic memory claims that the 5 queens, one of which being Medusalith of Earth's Inhumans, will join the one king who returns from the forever night and band together in a new holy land which will be known as New Hala. So basically, for a short period of time, Black Bolt had 4 other wives, being the queens of the other Inhuman societies, but they were all de-lifed, so it doesn't really matter anymore.
You all really love the goo, and I'm here to love that symbiotic black mass of alien space goop along with you. I'm your host, Amanda McKnight. You can find me over on Twitter at Vampex13 if you want to talk more about Venom, but for now we're going to jump into another weird, chaotic video where I attempt to explain the extended Venom family tree in this part 2. Last time I asked if you would like an extended family tree for Venom where we cover clones and hosts as related to Venom and their offspring, and you said yes. So let's do that thing. Starting off, I have to pay respects to, yes, the one newest member of the Venom symbiote family that I missed. I'm so sorry, you sweet, sweet goo baby. How could I have forsaken you thus? But do not worry, I'm going to make it up to you. That's right, we're talking about Silence. In part 1 of this video series, I talked about Scream. Scream was one of Venom's forced pregnancies when they were taken by the Life Foundation and forced to procreate. Scream would have quite a journey in the comics. First, the symbiote was crazed and somewhat chaotic due to their actual schizophrenic host, then they were dead, then they were revived but became nullified before finally settling into a more permanent host, but only for their host to be killed again. Overall, a very rough go. Dr. Steven, the head of Alchemex's astrobiology department, would acquire samples of the symbiote's corpse and attempt to revive it. This might sound kinda mad science-y and evil, but Dr. Steven overall is known as an ally to and expert on symbiotes. Unable to revive Scream, Dr. Steven then combined the samples he had with some anti-venom serum, and lo and behold, something new was born from this genetic combination. This something new took the name of Silence, as they saw themselves as the absence of Scream or anti-Scream. And what is the absence of a Scream? Silence. Silence made their first comic book appearance in Extreme Carnage Phage issue number 1. Silence would bond with the same host as had become the newest permanent host for the Scream symbiote, Andy Benton. We'll talk a little bit more about Andy later on though. While Silence is like a genetic offspring of Anti-Venom and Scream, you could also consider them a clone. In fact, it's kinda better if you do, because Anti-Venom and Scream hooking up, it kinda sounds weird, considering that Venom is the parent of Scream and Anti-Venom is like an alternate clone of Venom in a way, or you know, like Venom's brother. So that's kinda weird. Symbiotes are weird though, so maybe that doesn't bother you. But speaking of clones, the Venom family has quite a few. But just who are these symbiote clones exactly? First up, let's focus on the main symbiote of this family, Venom. In part 1, I listed a slew of other influential figures that I didn't have time to dig into more that were also important to Venom, so we're going to start with one of those. Starting off with the clone made from a piece of Venom's tongue, Mania, who would later be known as Maniac. Maniac. Mania was created by the Ararat Corporation and was to be used in an alien's plot to destroy all life on Earth. But the symbiote got loose and things quickly went pretty sideways. It would jump from host to host, draining them, and would become particularly obsessed with Patricia Robertson, one of the few people who had managed to survive the clone's deadly rampage, and Wolverine, who the clone saw as its ideal host. Eventually the clone would be devoured by Venom, reabsorbed, but during Venom's time with host Flash Thompson, the clone would later be regurgitated and then merge with Andy Benton, becoming known as Mania. Later on, Lee Price would take the symbiote clone from Andy, and while merged with Price, it would become known as Maniac, adding a C on the end there. Fitting for a host as diabolically evil and cruel as Lee Price. I wonder if that's what the C is for, cruelty. But there isn't just a replica of Venom in Mania/Maniac. Venom also had another straight up clone known as Venom the Third or Legion. This alternate version of the symbiote was actually not just a clone of Venom. It was a sample of the Earth 1610 or Ultimate Universe Venom, merged with a bunch of other symbiote codices from Earth 616 Venom, Carnage, Phage, Lasher, Riot, Agony, Mania, Sleeper, and Tyrannosaurus, as well as a collection of codices from other famous heroes who once bonded with a symbiote. This alternate amalgamated Venom clone would be absorbed to help boost Venom in their fight against Dark Carnage, allowing Eddie to manifest a Necrosword to defeat Carnage. Afterwards, Legion was absorbed into Venom, along with the Grendel symbiote, which itself had become a newer version of Carnage. Mania/Maniac and Legion aren't the only Venom clones out there either. While Eddie Brock was separated from the Venom symbiote and suffering from cancer, Anti-Venom was born. This was as a result of Mr. Negative's powers fusing white blood cells with remnants of the Venom symbiote within Eddie, which healed him and created something new. A sort of living, but initially non-sentient, purifying symbiote which became known as Anti-Venom. While Eddie was bonded with Anti-Venom, he was free of having any other pesky voices to share his consciousness with, and could finally be at peace, alone in his own head. Anti-Venom, however, is also dangerous to symbiotes as it completely purifies its host body, meaning it can destroy any invading viruses, diseases, or of course, alien symbiotes that happen to hitch a ride, so watch out for that. Agent Anti-Venom is also not just Anti-Venom bonded with Flash Thompson, but another altered version of a piece of Venom created by a derivative anti-venom serum, which was created using the original Anti-Venom. Are you confused yet? Basically, the anti-venom serum was made by Dr. Steven as a result of what he learned from Anti-Venom, the symbiote clone. When Venom attempted to bond with both Flash Thompson and Eddie Brock at the same time, Spider-Man attempted to save them, spilling a bunch of anti-venom serum onto Flash. This anti-venom serum altered the part of Venom that was bonded with him, creating Agent Anti-Venom, which is the name for the symbiote offshoot when it is bonded to Flash Thompson. It doesn't end there either, because of course it doesn't. There is a third anti-venom as well. This one, like the third version of Venom's kinda clone, Legion, happens to be an amalgamation of sorts. Anti-Venom the Third was made manifest by Flash Thompson from within the hive mind. Using freed symbiotes, Flash was able to physically appear as an anti-venom styled symbiote dragon in the real world. Pretty badass. This dragon also ended up being Flash's one-way ticket back to life afterwards, allowing him to resurrect himself, which is how he returned to life after he died. This symbiote would later become known as the new Agent Anti-Venom. Although the weird thing about that is before we said, Anti-Venom isn't really connected to the hive mind, and now it is, and now it's kinda got a consciousness and is sentient or something, so that is confusing. But hey, it's part of the comics. Most clones, as you can see, get reabsorbed or altered in some way during resurrection. But do symbiote clones also ever have symbiote babies of their own? That's a good question. For the most part, I would say no. But as with the weirdness that is the Venom family tree, there are always some exceptions. Namely with Mania or Maniac. Maniac gave birth, not really, but kind of, to some symbiotes when Lee Price infected the members of Black Cat's gang with pieces of the Maniac symbiote. Bonding with the remnants of symbiote from Venom in Mac Gargan's body, which technically meant that Maniac bonded with that which it was cloned from, something new was created, called Scorpion. Scorpion is a green and black symbiote that looks similar to Matt Gargan's Scorpion armor. Sadly, Scorpion wouldn't be around for too long and would later be destroyed in a fight with Agent Anti-Venom. Scorpion, though, was just one member of the Inklings, a group of criminals who were possessed by pieces of the Maniac symbiote. If you want to consider them children, you kinda could. Obviously, Gargan had a little more free will, but some of those targeted were more like prisoners to the symbiote that had attached to them. Lee Price created the Inklings as part of a plan to create his own gang and criminal empire, and for most of them the piece of symbiote they had was just like on their face like a mask. Among those infected, along with Black Cat's gang, was also Black Cat herself. Those who were being controlled as well were freed from the influence of their symbiotes at the same time that the symbiote Scorpion was destroyed in Venom issue 160, when Andy Benton and Agent Anti-Venom attacked them with anti-venom coated weapons and explosive bullets. And that was the end of the Inklings. Any surviving pieces of Maniac returned to host Lee Price. While clones and their offspring are pretty cool, when it comes to Venom there are lots of influential figures who I would consider part of the family tree who aren't symbiotes at all. We call these non-symbiote family members hosts. Venom has had many hosts over the years. In the first part of this explained video I listed some of them as I was short on time, but for this extended family tree, this part 2 if you will, I have a little bit more time to outline some of these important hosts and how they came to connect with the Venom symbiote. Although historically it's likely that Null was first, Tel-Kar is often referred to as the first host or original host when it comes to the Venom symbiote. Tel-Kar was, you know, retconned to be that, but hey, we still gotta respect the retcon sometimes. Tel-Kar is a member of the Kree and he used the symbiote in the Kree-Skrull War, using it to infiltrate, sabotage, and assassinate the Skrull. After Tel-Kar was captured, the Venom symbiote happened to escape, eventually coming to Earth, and only after taking up the name of Venom for itself and its main host. Tel-Kar would return later and also end up bonded with Sleeper. Sleeper would actually use Tel-Kar as a kind of internal meat puppet for a while, after he'd been put in a brain-dead state by Sleeper. Later, Tel-Kar would die while still bonded with the symbiote, and I believe Sleeper actually tried to hold on to that corpse for a while, but that's another tale for another time. Once the Venom symbiote found its way to Earth, it bonded with Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man. This is supposedly what gave it spider-like abilities, being bonded to a superhuman host like Spider-Man. However, when Spider-Man learned that the cool new black suit he'd obtained was actually a living being that was controlling his body at night, well, he wanted no part of it and decided to leave the symbiote. Venom didn't like that very much and was like, I feel rejected. This is how the symbiote would meet the love of their life and become Venom, bonding with Eddie Brock, who had his own reasons for hating Spider-Man. Their mutual hate of Spider-Man created a strong connection between Eddie and the Venom symbiote, and over time their bond would become even stronger. Eddie is often considered to be the host for Venom, as Cletus Cassidy often is considered the host for Carnage. However, Venom has found it hard to choose between bonding with Spider-Man and or Eddie when given the chance, and of course has also found it hard sometimes when choosing between Eddie and Flash. During the Venom symbiote's time with Eddie, it would also bond a few times with Anne Wang, Eddie Brock's ex-wife, giving us the horrifying sexiness that is She-Venom. Venom started as a villain, would become a hero, but would return to a life of brutality and villainy when it bonded for a time with Matt Gargan, who would also become a sort of on-again, off-again host for the symbiote, to a much lesser extent though, of course, in comparison to someone like Eddie Brock, or even I would say Flash Thompson. Venom would then once more return to being a hero, this time the greatest hero the symbiote really had ever been, when it met and bonded with Flash Thompson. It was given to Flash after he lost his legs during his military tour in Iraq. Flash would teach Venom the meaning of being a hero, which the symbiote would come around to as time went on, though Flash would often still need substances to help him control the symbiote for a while. However, it was also during Venom's time with Flash that they would travel to Clintar and the symbiote would be purified of all the evil within it. Flash, with the Venom symbiote, would also go on cosmic adventures and become known for a weird time as Venom, Space Knight. From there, Venom was not so lucky in terms of hosts. The symbiote's next new host would be a cruel one, Lee Price. Lee Price is known for his constant mistreatment of the symbiote. Also, although Venom had just been purified, Price's time with the symbiote began to corrupt the mind and kind of soul of Venom once more, making Venom question itself and become extremely insecure. A slew of other characters have bonded with the Venom symbiote, including Otto Octavius, sometimes known as Dr. Octopus or Doc Ock for short. This was during a time, however, that Otto was in Peter's body, known as Superior Spider-Man, and then for a short time, of course, as Superior Venom while bonded with the symbiote. Although it was short-lived, Otto in Peter's body bonding with Venom is really cool to note, as Carnage has actually also merged with Norman Osborn before, so both symbiotes now also have ties to other famous Spider-Man villains. Cletus Cassidy would also bond with the Venom symbiote much later on, after Cletus was resurrected by the Grendel symbiote, which combined with the remnants of the Carnage symbiote to resurrect Carnage. He would set out on a mission to awaken Null, the god of symbiotes. Through absorbing all the codices within the bodies of those who were once merged with the symbiote. In the end, he succeeded despite dying, and Venom was one of those that he amassed. However, Eddie would seemingly kill Cletus, at least his physical body, taking all the codices back within himself and becoming Venom once more, before going on to become the King in Black. Following Eddie becoming the King in Black, Dylan Brock, Eddie's son, who we talked about on part 1 of this list, became the host of the Venom symbiote. As Venom is also kind of like a parent to Dylan, this allows Venom to also keep an eye on him for Eddie when Eddie is otherwise busy leading the hive mind.